Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Uh, if you would, let's just land with a moment of grounding, presence. We give acknowledgement also to those listening in later. Say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Make intent for a connective gathering. The name of this gathering, what we're calling it, is Dancing in the Fire, Muslim Spirituality and Illuminating a Path to Freedom. And I've been invited by Zaya and Mauricio with San to just moderate the time today. So thank you for that honor as a guest. And we will be here with Farah El-Sharif, Ayesha Kajee, and Seemi Ghazi. And I'll turn it over in just a moment to them, and that will be the majority of the time, listening to each of our presenters, enjoying some guided practice, enjoying some time for Q&A. But before we turn to that, I want to say a few things briefly. One is just thanks to the team at SAND and everyone involved in the documentary Where Olive Trees Weep. I've seen it. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it to share it. It's very clear and heartfelt. And I was just saying to others with the team that it could have been made yesterday or 2 years ago or 20 years ago or 60 years ago. And it is awful, the pretense around which we gather. So I will trust in light of time that if you're here, if you're listening, that you have some sense of the unfolding genocide in Gaza, in Palestine. What the piece that I very briefly want to name up front, by way of situating myself, and I'm a U.S. citizen. I live in southern Spain with my wife and 2 girls. I'm practicing Muslim. And I want to say, because we are gathering with a panel that focuses on Islamic spirituality or Muslim spirituality, that from my read on it, what is happening in Palestine, the occupation is not primarily a religious conflict. It is a conflict that takes on religious layers and dimensions, but the ideology of Zionism that upholds and rationalizes the occupation, it's a historically recent form of settler colonialism, European style settler colonialism, that has been grafted onto a very ancient, beautiful tradition with Judaism, much to the distress and objection of many anti-Zionist, non-Zionist Jewish people, and also is a force within Christianity. I say this because the majority of Zionists on earth are not Jewish people. They're evangelical Christians. And as an American, I have a particular aversion, and it feels particularly important to me that the conflict not be framed as a conflict between Muslims and Jews in some way, when it's really a conflict between European settlers of different backgrounds and European colonialist powers and Palestinian people of diverse backgrounds. And I say that because especially white evangelical Christians in the US get off the hook when it's framed as an ancient religious conflict, which it is not. That said, the focus here is around Islam and the richness and beauty of Islamic spirituality as it is on display also through the profound resilience of Palestinian people, not just since last October, but ongoing with the occupation. And I would just say, before turning it over, that Islam in general, like as a tradition, knows a thing about resistance to colonialism. That the vast majority of mostly Muslim places on earth have experienced occupation by European powers in the last 200 or 300 years. And if you're tuning into what's happening now in Palestine, because you have a larger sense of solidarity or opposition to colonialism, then there's richness within Islam about how to oppose that, not only from the last few hundred years, but even from the lifetime of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who did a lot of standing against greed and misuse of power and power over dynamics. So yeah, that feels important to me to add. Thank you for your trust in being here. I don't want to take up more time. We have three wonderful presenters, and I will be facilitating some of the Q&A portion after that. But let me turn it over to Farah in Amman. And thank you again, everybody, for being here and for your presence and trust.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for that. Thank you, Sand, for your principled work. Thank you, Zaya and Maurizio, for making this beautiful film. I am sending salams, peace, and greetings to all the attendees, and especially to my esteemed co-panelists, Ayesha and Seemi. And of course, special gratitude goes out to Daniel, our wonderful moderator. Very, very honored and grateful, really, for this opportunity to gather to talk about this stunning film, When Olive Trees Weep. So, and putting it in conversation with the theme of today's webinar on Muslim faith and spirituality in the Palestinian struggle. But before anything, I really wanted to first and foremost pay tribute to the resistance and fortitude of my people, the Palestinian people, be they Muslim or Christian, who draw strength from their faith to sustain their incredible grace under suffering, which was captured both beautifully and tragically in the film. And to think that the situation is even worse now than when the film was made, and even much worse than it was 8 months ago only, is really beyond words. This beyond dystopic reality is enough to stun us into silence forever, really. It is very hard to find the words. But we draw strength for their sake, right? We speak, we gather here for their sake. At the very least, we can act as witnesses for them and testify loudly against the injustices of this harrowing and horrific moment. So without referring to it directly, I feel the film really captured the concept of Palestinian Sumud. Now, what is Sumud? Sumud, to those who don't know, is an Arabic word with no direct English equivalent. It is a state of being that is reserved for the perseverance of the Palestinian people alone. So if you were to imagine it, so aptly related to the title of this film, to me, Sumud is like a stubborn, weeping, millennia-old olive tree ravaged by fire, wind, and the harshest of elements. And now it is as if our legendary Sumud is screaming in agony. It is begging to be euthanized. How can it not? How can it not when we have looked into the sorrowful eyes of an entirely new wartime category, the WCNSF, wounded child with no surviving family? How can we not when we are still witnessing men desperately dig for their kids in the rubble, and little brothers scoop up the remains of their family in plastic bags? The lives of over 15,000 innocent children ruthlessly reaped like plows in a harvest of death. So I caution myself first, and I caution us all, not to valorize Palestinian resilience or Sumud as something otherworldly or superhuman, which sometimes people tend to do. We also must be careful not to be voyeurs of the Palestinian Herculean resilience, or worse, be complicit in spiritually bypassing their pain, as if they have the capacity to simply bear more than the rest of us, because that's simply not true. At the same time, it is important that we pay tribute to their humanity, to the way in which they stand in the face of this ongoing Holocaust. And so we lower our wing in humbled awe of their perseverance in the face of this indiscriminate demonic bloodlust and destruction. This needs to be talked about again and again to forevermore, because it places in sharp contrast the beauty of the human spirit embodied in the Palestinian collective versus the ugliness of their maniacal oppressor. So this rich and rough tapestry of Palestinian Sumud amidst atrocity reminds me of this C.S. Lewis quote that I love, where he said, "How monotonously alike are all the tyrants and conquerors have been, and how gloriously different are the saints." So look at all the oppressors across time and space. Like they're all the same, right? Very unoriginal, really. They all pillage, they are ruthless, they steal, they kill, they have this God complex, they thrive on torturing, ridiculing, with racism, supremacy, and arrogance. Whereas the saints who walk humbly and righteously along the footsteps of Musa, Moses, Isa, Jesus, and Muhammad, peace be upon them, are the oppressed in this story. And they are so wonderfully different. I think the luminous Ashira Darwish referred to this in the film. She said, Palestinians are so creative. They're so beautifully and painfully creative and different and diverse. Because from the fire and fury of this genocide, we have seen saintly artists, bakers, healers, poets, singers, storytellers, doctors and nurses, caregivers. We have seen a microcosm of the human spirit itself, because Palestine represents the best of humanity. It is the whole of humanity. It is as if the strangulation of the Palestinians is a suffocation of humanity itself. We all feel that. We all feel like zombies because we feel like suffocated by this. And that is by design. That is the way the Creator, made us, made the world to be one. And it is a betrayal of this oneness. So for the remainder of my reflections, I really wanted not to center my own voice, but one of the many saintly voices from Palestine, one straight from the heart of Gaza, of a wonderful journalist from the north, of a very ravaged region that is undergoing famine again and again. I listen to him daily, and I wanted to pay tribute to him here. His name is Mahmoud Al-Amoudi. And he's actually much, much more than a journalist. He's a fisherman by trade, and then he became a journalist to broadcast stories of his people's pain. And so now almost daily in Arabic, he offers spiritually uplifting reminders and talks about the promise of hope, about cultivating gratitude, even in a genocide. He talks about the greater wisdom animating this injustice. He talks about cultivating rooted patience from the Quran and the prophetic tradition. I mean, not only that, imagine, Mahmoud has the magnanimity of this. He's offering us on the outside solace on how to remedy the guilt of feeling like we're not doing enough for them. Imagine that he is living what he is living through, conditions of bombing, famine, and ethnic cleansing, and yet he is worried about how we are coping. Ya Allah. So I want to relate to you what Mahmoud was saying. Maybe this will offer you some solace, right? He was saying on this feeling of guilt, like we are not doing enough, in one of his reels, and he used this hadith. A hadith is a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So the hadith goes like this. A man comes to the Prophet and asks him, when will the hour be? And the Prophet, peace be upon him, says, and what have you prepared for it, i.e. the hour or judgment day? So the man said, nothing, except that I love Allah and his apostle. So the Prophet then replied, you will be with those whom you love. And the companions relay that they have never been so elated than to hear those words, i.e., you will be with those you love. So Mahmoud so prophetically and graciously comforts us here by saying, if you love us, if you love the people of Palestine, you will be with us. You will be with those whom you love. And this hadith is interesting because it is often used in the Islamic spiritual tradition to bring comfort to the seeker, to the wayfarer who is constantly longing for the divine and searching, but somehow doesn't feel enough, so to speak, right? Morally or spiritually speaking, like they're always falling short, like they're not good enough. So this hadith reminds us that when we falter, when we err, that as long as we love those who are good, that we will be safe. It reminds us that struggling in this world is ultimately a matter of love. Love for justice, love for the good, love for the souls who restore our faith in ourselves and in humanity. So it is at the end of the day, our love and God's love for us that will save us, and not our own actions or our piety. So though Mahmoud did not mention this, I find it very prescient that he relayed in this hadith the question of when is the hour, because many people are like, when will relief come? When will it happen? But rather we should be asking, what have you prepared for that moment, right? If the Gaza genocide is not awakening within us a flame of love to raise our aspirations, if it is not asking of us to prepare our hearts, to purify our intentions, and to increase in our love for humanity and sacrificing for the greater good and for others, what is the use of our solidarity? If we learn one thing from the people of Palestine, is that it is to love better and to love more fiercely and to abhor and reject injustice both within us and in the world, in word and deed. Not just as fence sitters, not just as armchair voyeurs, but to dare to have skin in the game, to be touched by this fire along with them, to shed furious tears and to be moved into action. I know my time is up. I'll wrap up shortly. Sorry, Daniel. So ultimately, this affair is about love then, a love for justice, a love for humanity, and that is what will save us. And that is not a force that any earthly army can withstand. I want to end here by saying that Mahmoud put another video out the other day requesting one thing from everybody who cares about Gaza and the plight of Palestinians. He said, no matter what you do, please, please do not pity us. I think Ahed al-Tamimi said the same thing in the film. She said, we are not victims. The victims are the ones who are the oppressors, the ones who kill, the ones who are filled with hate. Those are the victims. And I think that is really important to underscore, and I'll end with this. Palestinians do not need our pity. They do not need our sorrow. They need us to reframe the narrative and see them as leaders in this fight for the soul of humanity and as heralds, incredibly sacrificing everything to birth a new world. They want us to see them as creatives, as teachers, as incredible, courageous freedom fighters fighting the fiercest, strongest military on earth all alone. They want you to see them as Christians and Muslims who unapologetically uphold their faith, who believe in their right to resist injustice, especially when Islam has been the target of so much fear-mongering and suspicion through decades of racist Orientalism and dehumanizing Islamophobia. This is the same campaign that fueled the war on terror that reaped the lives of millions in Iraq and Afghanistan. And this has been the same narrative, this civilizational othering, this vitriol feeding the West's poison on Islam and almost 100-year-longs of this occupation. So for better or worse, this genocide has unraveled something far, far greater than itself. It accomplished the impossible. It challenged an entire global system to look within, to take a hard look at itself. In this moment of global reckoning and awakening, we are learning that the rules-based order is nothing but a ruse-based order. To counter the charade, this ruse, we must hold on to the rope of prophecy, which lives on in the hearts of the modern day saints, those who carry the spirit of Jesus, David, Moses, and Muhammad in the ghettos, in the refugee camps, in the rubble of Palestine, Sudan, Congo, and Yemen. So I will end here and apologize for going a little bit overboard. Thank you.
Thank you, Farah.
Well,
I'm happy for the mic to just pass to Ayesha.
thank you, Daniel. Assalamu alaikum, peace and blessings to all of you, whatever your spiritual or religious orientation may be. I wish for you peace in all that you do and all that you are. I think it falls to me in on this panel to really make the parallels between apartheid South Africa and Palestine. I don't normally speak about places I haven't been to. And so while I've been involved in Palestine solidarity work for decades, ever since I was an anti-apartheid activist myself, I haven't spoken publicly about the parallels before before last year, because I hadn't been in Palestine. But I was there in the last 10 days of Ramadan last year. And being South African who was born under apartheid and raised under apartheid, we are very perhaps sensitized to recognizing apartheid, to recognizing any form of discrimination wherever we see it, but particularly apartheid. And I once asked the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, almost indignantly, you've said that the apartheid in Palestine is worse than it was in South Africa. How can that be? This is where apartheid began. This is where it was incubated and developed, and this is where it evolved. Having been in Palestine, of course, I haven't been in Gaza. I wasn't allowed to go there, but I've traveled in much of the West Bank and spent a lot of time in East Jerusalem. Having been there, I can understand why he said it was worse. He asked me, he said, have you been there? And I said, no. And he said, you should go, because then you'll understand why I say it is worse. So quite honestly, I want to begin by saying that South Africa may have been where apartheid was, where the architecture of apartheid was built. But Palestine is where apartheid has been perfected in a hugely grotesque sense. And the film brings this out really beautifully. To make just a very few parallels, the issue of citizenship. In South Africa, Black South Africans were stripped of their citizenship in much the same way as German Jews were stripped of their citizenship in Nuremberg, and of course, as much as Palestinians in Palestine were stripped of their citizenships particularly since the establishment of Israel. So this issue of citizenship, of becoming an alien, a migrant in your own land, is one that has huge parallels between South Africa and Palestine. The second, of course, and related to that, is the issue of land, being forcibly moved off your land clearances, as they were called here in South Africa, and then land designated for specific people only. All of that, of course, is again very, very prevalent in Palestine today. And the parallels that were made with South African Bantustan, separate homelands for Black people, the parallels between those and places in the West Bank, places like Nablus and Jenin, places like Hebron, where inhabitants can't walk out of their own front doors and instead have to climb out a back window and go through a neighbor's yard to actually go and do grocery shopping. Those parallels are startling, and perhaps even more stark, the levels of discrimination in Palestine than they were in apartheid South Africa. So the ghettos, the separate housing and land, but also the so-called separate development, apartheid-style education, different education for different groups of people, different roads for different groups of people, different healthcare systems, different water reticulation systems and access to water, having to pay for your own water, the water that comes from your land, and having to actually buy it back. And not least, of course, the apartheid wall. the physical embodiment of this separation between one group and the other, between haves and have-nots, between those who are privileged in myriad ways and those who are not just lacking in privilege, but who have been stripped of privilege in the same myriad ways. And then, of course, the detention without trial, what we used to call detention without trial here in Palestine, in the occupied territories. It's called by the Israeli occupation forces, it is called administrative detention. But it is essentially the same thing. Imprison people without giving them access to lawyers, imprison people without giving them access to any rights, imprison people without trying them, without any access to justice. And of course, added onto that, the burden of both the imprisonment and, as we've seen so starkly over the last 8 months or so, the murder of children, the imprisonment of children and the murder of children against every child rights law in any country, anywhere in the world, I would think. And on the issue of children, that brings me back to what we call Soweto Day here in South Africa. It's coming up next week, actually, on Sunday, June 16th. June 16th, 1976, was perhaps a turning point for South African apartheid, because it was the day that marked a shift, a gradual shift in the consciousness of the world about South Africa and about apartheid here, where you had about 20,000 students, high school students, tertiary education students, even primary age students, go out and march and protest against separate education, apartheid education, what we call Bantu education here. And for me, it's very equivalent to the 30th of March, 2018, the March of Great Return in Gaza and elsewhere in Palestine. Again, the parallels are almost overwhelming. You know, on Soweto Day, 176 people were killed, so the apartheid state said. We actually think it was a lot more than that. And of that 176, we think it was up to about 700. 23 casualties were identified as students. On the 30th of March, 2018, 214 Palestinians were killed, 46 of whom were children, with live ammunition in both cases. And up until post-October 7, 2023, I would have said that the parallels between Soweto Day here and the Great March Day or Land Day 2018 in Gaza were perhaps significant because, again, that marked a shift, I think, in global consciousness. But then, of course, post-October 7, you know, with the almost unimaginably violent, malevolent, vicious murder of people, including the murders of thousands upon thousands of children. We have come to a state where if global consciousness hadn't shifted, and indeed amongst many it hasn't, I would have said that perhaps we have become deadened. But it is encouraging that at the very least we have social media warriors. It is encouraging that this is perhaps the first genocide anywhere in the world that has been live streamed to our hands, to our phones, to our laptops and all our other devices. It has bypassed the so-called mainstream media. And because of that, it has become almost impossible for any person of conscience anywhere in the world to deny that at the very least ethnic cleansing is happening in the occupied territories. And certainly, as South Africa has so cogently expressed at the ICJ, genocide is happening in Gaza. So the parallels between apartheid and Palestine for me are not just troubling, but as I said, overwhelming. And I think that beyond South African apartheid, beyond even Palestinian apartheid until some months ago, what is currently going on in Gaza is a schooling for all of us. The Gazans are schooling us with their taqwa, with their steadfastness, with their sumud. I watched a young man and then spoke to him. He made a documentary film on his cell phone. It's called Ahmed Alive. I went to the world premiere in Durban, which is my hometown here. And the thing that really struck everybody in the audience was that even when Ahmed's house was being bombed around him, and he was filming this as he was evacuating the house, at any time when some calamity hits, some disaster, and these are not natural calamities, of course, but IOF inflicted ones, the word that first came to his lips, and I've seen it again and again on social media, on clips of people at Al-Shifa Hospital, in Al-Nusayrat last week, in just about the flower massacre, when people lose their children, when they lose their elders, when they lose every single family member and they're the only one standing, the word that comes to their lips is Alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah. In all of this, the beauty of their steadfastness, of their perseverance, of their bearing witness, because martyrdom is not only about being killed for a cause, being murdered for a cause, but in Islam, it literally means to bear witness. And that martyrdom is such, and I know Seemi is going to talk more about this, is such a beautiful, beautiful aspiration to strive for, because in striving for it, the Palestinians and the Gazans particularly are showing us that there is life beyond here. There is truth beyond here. Our spirits live on. And we are truly blessed to be able to witness this together with the Palestinians. May their bearing witness and us bearing witness alongside, albeit at second and third hand, may that bearing witness also bear fruit in victory. I think I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you, Sand, for having us. Thank you, Daniel and Lisa, for holding us.